Hey there, fam. I had a really weird moment just now where I was like, I had my hand, s- I had my hand over the button that said go live, and I was watching the clock count up, like the clock on the computer screen that said 10:59, and I was like, okay, I think I'm just gonna click it early while it still says 59. I was like 3, 2, 1, and as I counted out loud, the clock changed to 11. I was like, oh my god. I didn't even know how many seconds there were. That's my great story to start this off with. Like, I just like really weird synchronicities like that. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say before we got started. So, we're finishing up chapter 7 this week. I'm going to try to make this preamble kind of quick, but this video is probably going to end up being like an hour and a half, maybe almost 2 hours long. But like, so last week, um, we read a part where member in training, basically. And now when Jane and Carmen hang out, instead of both of them talking about how crazy the Moonies are, Jane has started like playing devil's advocate on behalf of the Moons. And Carmen is starting to feel like talking to Jane isn't much different from talking to a member at all. And there was a moment where Carmen was like, but they're sinister. There's something really sinister going on here. And Jane says, like, they're not a violent group. Or maybe Carmen like says that in her head after Jane gives some sort of rebuttal. And I paused last week to say, are you sure? Like, people have been stabbed to death. People have had their houses set on fire when they tried to put Moon into Danbury prison. Um, and domestic violence counts as violence. And I was a little disappointed that that's where I left my answer because of a couple things. Number one, um, I think the obvious thing I should have brought up is that Reverend Moon and his family literally own an arms dealership. Like they manufacture ultra compact handguns. They manufacture weapons. And that for a lot of people in the 70s was the tipping point for them. It was the piece of information that helped them break their conditioning and break out of the church. And I think I hesitated from even opening that can of worms in the middle of the live stream last week because I've learned the hard way talking about being an ex-Moonie and being anti-unification church on Instagram and Facebook that as soon as you say the word guns, if you're saying with this particular crowd, if you say the word guns in a sentence and that sentence is not something to the effect of I love my guns and I love shooting guns and that's why I collect guns. If you use the word gun in a sentence in any other context, I am going to get direct messages from people I know who say like, "Hey, I agree with you that the church isn't that great, and that's why I'm not in it anymore. But have you heard of guns? Have you ever worshipped like at our Church of the Lord and Savior Colt 45? Like, I don't know. Isn't Colt 45 a drink and also a gun? I mean, I've shot guns before. My dad took me to a firing range in St. John's, which is like the hood of Portland, if Oregon had a hood. Um, and like I was firing a Glock at like age 8, but I don't know. I don't worship guns like that. I saw the movie Hardball while my friends were getting stoned one day and had to go to a shooting range the very next day. And I was like, I don't want to shoot G baby. I'm not trying to live like this anymore. I don't approve of gun violence. I don't want to participate in this. And when I pull this trigger, all I think about is G baby now. This isn't fun for me. But if you've never seen Hardball with Keanu Reeves and baby Michael B. Jordan and baby a lot of talented people, then you have no idea what I'm talking about, and this makes no sense, and this isn't funny to you. But it's just like it makes me so sad that I didn't even want to bring that up last week, when it's like a major thing, and it makes me so sad that guns are such an irrationally controversial issue in the United States. Like somehow when you talk about wanting to reduce unnecessary and easily preventable gun violence with some very basic administrative laws that literally every other country adopted 50 plus years ago, all of a sudden people are like, you're a fascist who wants to eat my babies and come into my house and make me throw out all of the foods that are not pre-approved by you and your vegan liberal gay friends. And like you really can't just talk about guns. You have to bring up everyone's emotions, everyone's patriotism, everyone's heritage, the entire Revolutionary War, the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Like to question somebody's gun ownership in really extremist right-wing religious circles in the United States is to like question whether or not they're allowed to drink beer and eat hamburgers and shop at Walmart. Like, and so I thought for a moment, I was like, maybe before this live stream this week, I should clarify all the different ways that the Moonies are violent and encourage violence by promoting working for the second coming of Christ at the expense of your own personal safety and at the expense of your own life, because we're soldiers in a spiritual war and we don't live in the real world. We live as the only woke people in a matrix that's enslaving everyone and taking them away from what the true definition of love is. It's very bizarre, and it's hard to talk about because like when you say that a group is violent, you want to hear that like written in their doctrine commands to like kill people, and those are in there. It's just like I started making a list. This is what I'm trying to say. I tried to make an organized list of all the ways that I can prove the Moonies are a violent organization. And I was like, let me start by just recounting the details that I can from my personal life. And then I'll research and clarify those points I brought up last week of like the fundraiser who got stabbed in New York, or the member of a subcommittee of Congress who also investigated Jonestown, giving a summary of the reports they did on the Moonies to Congress and I don't know, the Supreme Court or something, and then going home and finding out their house was on fire. Like I can find the details for those and back up what I'm saying. And then if I want to, I'll get into who owns car arms, all the ways that the Moons as a bureaucracy with billions of dollars have been promoting violence and funding violence. And then if I have time, I'll add all the times that Reverend Moon in his literally hundreds of thousands of hours, well, let's not exaggerate, hundreds of hours of speeches, thousands of pages of speeches, there we go. All the times that he's told you to like told us to line up homosexuals and shoot them because they're more disgusting than dogs. Or all the times he said something like, if your wife is acting up and doesn't listen to you fast enough, you should fill her vagina with cement because her love organ has been claimed by Satan because she's not being subservient enough. And I'm going to read you what I got of this list so far. I had to stop with experiences from my personal life because there was just too much there. And I ran out of time before this live stream, even though I woke up at like 6:30 this morning and I've been doing nothing but prep for this live stream. Like from my personal life, examples of violence. When I was in elementary and middle school, I joined Sunhawk Children's Choir. Reverend Moon's wife, well, his third wife, was named Hak Jahan. So a lot of districts who wanted to please the Moons when they came to visit or show the Moon family, like, hey, our district is doing great. They would like name children's choirs or camps like after Reverend Moon. So this choir that was running for like, I don't know, 20 years, 10 years, it's a combination of Reverend Moon's name and his wife's name. So Sun Myung Moon, Hak Jahan, Sun Hak Children's Choir. And we sang Korean folk songs, Japanese folk songs in Hebrew, songs in French, classic like peace and love, protest songs, like all that kind of stuff. So I joined this choir, and one of my earliest memories from childhood is finally, the summer's here. I get to go to Seattle, like the exciting town of Seattle to go to choir camp. And it's basically a massive sleepover with all of these kids also from Seattle and Washington and Canada and all these cool people I only normally get to see at Camp Tongil like for 2 weeks. Like the summer just gets filled with more and more Mooney activities, right? And I'm so excited to get out of the house and go on an adventure. And one of our first days at choir camp, the choir director, who is my friend's mom, right? She announces to us that one of the second generation girls from Seattle who had just graduated high school and joined the Special Task Force, which is like the Mooney full-time fundraising program, she was raped and murdered while fundraising in Chicago. And even though we were children, she made sure to say raped and murdered, right? Because it's like, why protect? We're in lectures talking about sex and vaginas and penises and Eve destroying the fate of humanity. So why sugarcoat anything at this point, right? And this choir director announced that we were going to be selling this second gen girl was not only like a huge part of our very small Seattle, Portland, Washington, Canada community. She had been a member of the Sunhawk Choir. She was one of the cool older sisters I looked up to and brushed my teeth next to at summer camps. And like, I was on summer camp teams with her younger siblings. And like, she was one of the cool older sisters who made me want to join the Sunhawk Children's Choir in the first place. Like, when I thought about the cool older sisters who babysat me and raised me in Portland and how they would go off to these camps in Seattle and hang out with this girl and all the other cool Seattle girls, like I wanted to be that. They were my oppas and unnies, right? Because it was boys and girls in this choir. This cool older sister that I knew was raped and murdered, and our choir director announced that we were going to be selling Sunhawk Children Choir CDs on the street and at performances with her face on the back to help her family and contribute some of the sales to help her family pay to fly her body back over to the West Coast and take care of burial costs. And I hope someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I might be inventing this memory. I might be mixing it with testimonies I've heard from other people. But from what I remember, that moment was especially profound for me because I was like, wow, when you hear about someone being raped and murdered, you don't ever think about the aftermath. And you don't ever think you're going to be the person who has to wonder about how to take care of their decomposing body. And the church, I remember even as a child, I couldn't always like pick up on the subtlety of language that adults slip to each other while they're talking to children. But in that moment I did. And I noticed how angry she was. It was like a really bad thing that we had to pay for her body to come back to the West Coast. And like this choir mom had obviously been in close contact with this girl's mom from so many years of this girl doing choir. And then from that year on, instead of seeing this girl at camp, her younger sister and brother would bring her up in front of the whole camp on the last day of camp every year. And there's this song that a second gen in, I think, Tarrytown, New York, Teddy Hose knows. In upstate New York, there was a BC who wrote a song called Journey for one of Reverend Moon's kids who died. There was a child of, Reverend Moon had like 13 kids, right? So there was a child of Reverend Moon who would hang out with their second generation, and they were driving to get ice cream or driving back from the movies or some shit in a big van full of people, and a truck, like a semi truck, jackknifed, and this son of True Father, son of Reverend Moon, swerved the car at the last minute so that he in the driver's seat received like 70% of the impact, and the rest of the people around him received less of it. So if I remember correctly, I could be getting this totally wrong. one of Reverend Moon's kids died on impact and was mauled beyond recognition. I think another kid died. Two other kids were sent to the hospital, and one of them died in the hospital, and the other was like disfigured. And the other people lived. And if he hadn't swerved the van in that way, it would have been much worse for everybody else in the van. And a second gen who was either in the van with him or like knew him really well or knew another person who died, like he wrote this song Journey, and this became a holy song, like a song that was added to our song books that we would sing at song sessions. So at these Mooney song sessions we've been reading about, we've got 8 days a week and Bob Dylan songs and popular songs that you use to bring people into the church, and you change the words to be churchy approved. Then you have like the Korean folk songs and the extra culty songs that mention Reverend Moon by name that are like much harder to sell to people who have never gone to church and don't realize this is a religion, right? And then after a while, you had songs that church members wrote. There were so many songs that church members like wrote and passed around. They're like, and they wrote about Reverend Moon, or they made the song lyrics sound like country roads or sound like an old timey thing like that. And a second generation kid wrote a song in that category that we would add to that category of songbooks that got spread literally all over the world, because kids from America would sing these. Like Tarrytown and upstate New York was like one of the main focal points of brainwashing. There was like a university there where people from all over the country would go to get like their divine principle teaching certificate, basically, or something like that. Or you'd go to a blessing. If you couldn't fly to a blessing in Korea, you'd go to a blessing in New York. And so this song like spread all over the US when people would visit and hear this song and say, hey, that's a great song. And they'd make a copy of the lyrics with guitar chords over each one and memorize the melody. And then they would bring that song and say, hey guys, I know a brand new song. They sing this in New York. And you'd sing it 5 times a day, although it was like a big emotional one. So you'd save it for the song sessions on like the last day of camp, especially the last night of camp, where everyone's super emotional and you've done all these activities and you've had breakthrough spiritual highs, having the whole eyes rolling back in your head and being like, True Father's the one. That I don't know why I ever doubted this group. Like, I'm going to shave my head and move to Korea. Like, then you sing Journey. Then you sing the song about the dead homies and you remember why you're all here, and you like link arms and you brainwash yourself and you're like, they didn't die for nothing. Like, we miss them. And like, we would sing that about this. We threw her name whenever we introduced that song for the new little kids who were coming to camp, or if someone managed to bring a friend to a church camp, we'd say this song was written for so and so, and we're also going to sing it for this girl we know who died. And like, I don't know, afterwards, her younger sister, the girl who died in Seattle, her younger sister, I remember I grew up with her younger sister and her younger brother, and I'm about the same age as her younger brother. And like, her younger sister went on and became a grief counselor. Like, it literally, that event of losing her sister defined her life and her career. And her younger brother was radicalized and like went from being like a problem child to like being the most gung-ho Mooney dude ever. And like, he did, I think 2, maybe 3 years of the same special task force fundraising thing. And like, the rest of our community responded in a variety of different ways. And I just remember like learning that we were starting our own summer camp for kids in the Northwest so that we didn't have to ship kids as far. And so that we knew exactly what they were being taught. And I noticed parents questioning emails from headquarters more often and questioning the things that the church leadership did, and feeling extra bitter every time the church like forgot about our district specifically on like group emails about when the next blessing was coming, or when we're supposed to send money to this, or what Reverend Moon's up to these days. And I think ultimately there were a lot of reasons why a first generation from Canada decided to make an alternative and a competitor to Special Task Force, and made Next Gen Academy that was like its own private nonprofit. And he emphasized like, we don't give any money to the Moons. We prioritize you and your experience. We prioritize helping you to become a better person on this program. We want to keep you safe and help you to keep yourself safe. we would bring up this girl constantly, even on this program. So like I first heard about this girl dying when I was in elementary school. And even after I graduated high school and was the same age as her and started fundraising just like her, we were still talking to about her without mentioning her name on almost a daily basis. We would always, always, always have this um, resident alien from Mongolia, like Russian Mongolia. He was using Next Gen Academy. He joined in Russia and knew Mooney fundraising witnessing teams in Russia. And he was working for Next Gen Academy basically to sponsor his visa to be in the US. And he would give us safety lectures of how to be street smart while fundraising and how to be street smart when we went to Africa and these third world countries to do service projects, right? Where to keep your money, always keep your headphones out, like head on a swivel, like always be listening for things. If someone says this, you dip. If someone does this, you say this and you disengage, like that type of thing. And we always, always, always brought up like, okay, when you're in the passenger seat, you have to read this. And in big, bold letters, it's like sleepy co-drivers will be switched. Like if you get tired, you need to pull over. Basically just like emphasizing that we don't want any more Mooney children to be murdered while fundraising. We don't want any more Moonies to die in car accidents. We don't want anybody to go through the pain that we've already been through and have not been comforted for. You know, the church just keeps traumatizing us without any resolution after that. And then while I was on this fundraising program that brought up this deceased second gen girl, um, on nights we were bored or we wanted to hear stories from each other, we would ask one of the guys to tell the story of how he got stabbed in the chest while doing this like traditional, I forget what it's called. It was like town challenge or like basically to build character. Something that Mooney started doing was dropping a person off in a really small town completely by themselves with no money and no cell phone and leaving them there for 72 hours. So for 72 hours, this person has to get to know this town. They have to volunteer and figure out how to survive. Like basically ask people, can I mow your lawn for money? If I help fix your fence, will you let me sleep on your couch? And you have to like basically serve that town to survive and hope that someone will donate food and donate a place to stay. And so this guy from the East Coast or like the Midwest or something joined Next Gen Academy on the West Coast. They did a bunch of fundraising things. They did lectures in Seattle. They did blah, blah, blah. And then also at one point while fundraising, they did this challenge where he was dropped off by himself. And he said that he couldn't find a place to sleep, like whatever it was, like he thought that doing enough chores would let this person let him sleep on his couch, and he was wrong. And so he was like killing time and like staying up late writing in his journal outside of a bar because it was the only thing open. And like he'd never drank in his life and he wasn't going inside the bar, but he was like journaling outside. And long story short, like somebody at the bar got in a fight. He tried to do his whole I'm a monk, like I'm holy, I'm going to break this up. And the drunk dude was so sick of him and sick of hearing about God that he took a knife and stabbed him with all the strength he could, fully intending to kill him. And this second gen brother was wearing a jacket and had his journal in his jacket pocket. And so instead of him getting stabbed fatally in the chest and bleeding out, his journal got stabbed all the way through with a knife. And I think he got like pricked or something. So like on some Harry Potter Chambers of Secrets type shit, this drunk guy stabbed a knife through his journal attempting to kill him. I keep touching the mic, sorry. But like, and it's interesting because all these tales about the outside world being so dangerous. I mean, I guess I gave away the punchline. The tales of second gen dying, even in the case of like the car jackknifing, the truck jackknifing, right? And a second gen swerving into the car to sacrifice himself. It was never like, that's awful. We should have done something differently. I'm so traumatized. This should not have happened. We're going to make sure nothing like this happens. I can't believe we were so careless. The rhetoric was always, wow, look at how powerful Satan is. Look at how hard Satan is trying to attack our soldiers for God. Look at how important it is we keep working day in and day out for Reverend Sun Myung Moon so that there is no violence, there are no car accidents, there is no conflict. And aren't we so proud of the second gen for indemnifying so much by sacrificing their life? Word for word, that's how we talked about these events. So in this case, we were proud of this BC for not drinking, for being abandoned in a town by himself, and using his time constructively to journal and to pray and to de-escalate conflict. And isn't that so typical of a disgusting, selfish, individualistic, infected by Satan outsider to try to stab an innocent young man like this? This is why we do what we do. And then later, like when I was fundraising and it was my turn to go out, um, instead of planning my future career and preparing to go to college with my friends and saving money for myself and learning to be a self-sufficient adult with a credit history and a weekly money management routine, right? I was paying several $1,000s to share a bathroom with 15 other girls and sleep in elaborate bunk beds when we weren't sleeping in 15-seater vans, in sleeping bags, and taking sponge baths in public bathrooms. And when I was fundraising in a tiny town in Idaho and I walked into an antiques slash gun store being robbed in the middle of the day, I guess at this point I was so psychologically primed to think of the world in a certain way that I didn't want to get closer to see what was going on. I don't have a really cool story about what the guy holding up the store looked like or how that Mexican standoff ended. Because I'm not a spoiled, bored suburbanite who has to cling to drama and exaggerate everything to make myself feel cool. In that moment, when I walked in and I found the store owner's wife on the phone with the police describing everything as it was happening on the other side of the store, and several guys with her told me to turn around and walk right back out or I might get shot. Like, my first thought in that moment, I will never forget this. My first thought was, shouldn't I just fundraise them real quick, like ask them to make a donation so that I can save their soul in case they get shot? Like, I'll claim them for Reverend Moon real quick in case any of them die. And then my immediate second thought was like, no, stupid. That's the most brainwashed thing I've ever heard. And people on the street who have been asking you if you've been brainwashed by the Moonies were completely correct. So what you're going to do is go outside, shut the fuck up, call your fundraising captain and keep other people from going inside. Otherwise, you're going to end up just another person that they say they're singing the Dead Homie song for when everyone's eating s'mores on the last day of camp. Like, we have a song for our dead friends in the Moonies, only we don't say the phrase dead homies. We sing a song called Journey that sounds like if Aerosmith was singing like a really metaphysical, depressing version of Country Roads or Stairway to Heaven, you know? Just real melodramatic and 80s with it. Just real no self-analysis going on as to why these people died, why these literal children died. Just, this is epic. Aren't we on a wild adventure? I just remember thinking, like, you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to be just another girl on the back of a mixtape that my friends sell so that they can afford to see my body instead of letting it rot in a dumpster. That's what I'm not going to do. So, and at this point, like, I had to that's where I stopped. It's amazing. I've never like taken the time to spell all that out, and I didn't realize this was weird until I sat down with the task of trying to prove how the Moonies are case being violent against other members of the population. It's like gross negligence and a sadistic philosophy that sends your own kids out to literally be murdered. It's like, isn't your job as a parent in a community to prepare your children for success and like care about your children's emotional experience? Isn't that the point of a church, like, or a movement? But somehow this pipe dream that the words of Reverend Moon have magical voodoo in them that are going to purge the world of satanic germs because sins are like tiny little metaphysical spiritual bacteria that we don't have the technology to see, and Reverend Moon's words are disinfectant spray, but like emotional, energetic disinfectant spray. I'm like, and I think I had to stop also right there because these past couple weeks, I've gotten to the point in my treatment and my trauma recovery that I'm beginning to understand like being treated the way members treat people in this book from the moment I was born, like the way my parents were trained to treat people, the way members are treating Carmen and Jane here. They treated me that way during the most formative years of my life. And that has had lasting effects on my nervous system and my decision making because I internalized the belief that other people are dangerous, other people are monsters who will rape me and leave me for dead. Other people care about themselves and their needs more than they will ever care about me and my needs. And other people are more important than me and they probably should have their needs met before I do. And it impacts my ability to feel safe in relationships or feel safe in my own house. It led me to turn down jobs that would have been better for my lifestyle and my nervous system and take jobs that were life-threatening because I felt like it was my spiritual and divine obligation to suffer for the sake of curing humanity of the disease of selfishness. And now I have post-traumatic stress disorder that impacts my ability to sleep and my ability to stay calm and to focus or to believe that the person I'm talking to cares about me for me and doesn't have some ulterior motive that they're waiting to pressure me into. Does that make sense? Like, I'm so sorry that there are, again, spoiled suburbanite Tumblrinas who would love to be like the main character in their own version of 8 Mile or their own version of some rags to riches, A Star is Born type shit. Or they just like get their narcissistic supply by talking about how triggered they are by every goddamn thing on the internet. You spelled the word the incorrectly. I'm triggered. And it's like that meme of the white chick with thick frame glasses. Like, I'm so sorry if they've ruined the word triggered for you, but like triggered is literally medically the word to describe how my nervous system will kickstart a process that I cannot control once it has started. And if something happens, if I somatically experience something, my entire physical body hops on this well-trained habit of stay in the present moment and react appropriately to what's happening right now. I have no other terminology to describe that biological process in my body, so I'm going to keep using the word triggered. But I need you to know that, like, I literally have complex post-traumatic stress disorder that impacts my ability to, like, hold a job and that I receive services for at my campus. So, like, I'm qualified to get, like, a service dog if I had the money to train and pay for a service dog. So, like, fuck off. I don't know. It's like it's a lot to take in, and I didn't think it would be this much to take in. I didn't think it would hit me this hard. And it's almost like a small piece of me was still kind of in denial that all of this was this bad. You know, it's like, even when you do get comfortable saying the word cult and you do start familiarizing yourself with all the shady shit that happened in the Moonies, to find physical, tangible evidence in my everyday life that I am not prepared with the skills that other people have been prepared with. I have knee-jerk reactions that have been programmed into my body that other people can't relate to and have never seen. You know, it's like, it's a lot. It makes it super, super real. I sort of got like hit in the face with that as I tried to prepare for this live stream. I didn't even get to talk about car arms or the institutionalized arms dealing and like encouraging violence and being hired to convince the American people that violence against communist countries is okay. Like, the Moonies decades ago were hired to sabotage certain protests and hold other protests and endorse certain political people and use other terminology to help ease the American people into going to war and ease the American people into promoting capitalism and destabilizing entire governments and economies in the name of capitalism, because socialism and communism are of the devil. And it's like, you can see that here with the way they talk about communism, about how like, we're not just defeating communism, we're not just defeating Satan, we're defeating communism. Because communism and Satan are synonyms. They are the same thing. Communism is the hand of Satan, the glove of Satan. Like, I'm so frustrated that like, it's taken me until almost 30 years old to finally start learning about what systems of government literally are, as opposed to being brainwashed to believe that governments are gangs, preferred government and like political affiliations that you might talk about or check off on your ballot. It's like we were trained to believe it was like a cult or like an opposing religion, and not like an impartial, sometimes hypothetical way to maybe make the world suck less, you know? Because that's all it is. People who identify as communist in the United States, it's not like, what are you doing? It's not like they're going around stealing people's money and putting it all in a pot and saying, if you want your money back, you have to come live on our compound with us. Wait a second. That's what the Moonies did. You know, like the Moonies were going around forcefully indoctrinating people and then talking during that indoctrination, talking about communism and leftism and anything progressive, anything not like staunchly, classically conservative Christian, talking about it and describing everything they're doing. Like, you know how narcissists will be like, I know, no, I'm not, but that's what you are. I know you are, but what am I? Like, that's not what I'm doing. That's what you're doing. Oh, you think I'm an attention whore who never takes your emotions into consideration? You never listen to me. You never take my emotions into consideration. You talk too much. Stop talking. I'm still talking. You talk too much. Blah, blah, blah. What did I say? You talk too much. That's what narcissists do. They just flip the accusation around and point it right back at you and gaslight you to the point where the conversation fails to make any sense. They've destabilized your reality and they've made you distraught enough that you change the subject. That's what Moonies do with communism and with anyone who doesn't agree with their super conservative alt-right alternate reality that justifies child abuse and sexism and racism and homophobia and gross negligence and bad jokes, like no sense of humor and no swag whatsoever, bad sex, terrible sex. Couldn't find a clit if they had a microscope. Couldn't find a clit if they had GPS. The worst, right? They talk about anything that's not that by describing themselves and saying that communists and leftists are a cult that go around recruiting people. Like, if you've ever heard a super alt-right suburban woman on TikTok talking about how Jesus's warriors better step up because we're under spiritual attack. America is under spiritual attack. And these transvestites are going around recruiting young children. And that's why we need to outlaw healthcare and gender reaffirming medications from being given to 18-year-olds, because these dirty transgender liberal communist Satan horn people who have tails and forked tongues are going around recruiting small children to become transgenders, like not even knowing how to say the shit. It's like if a narcissist was an amorphous ideology who could infect and possess anyone at any time. That's what this movement feels like to me. Well, we're 40 minutes in. It's just been me rambling. Let's get back to reading, or let's start reading. Okay. So we left off with Carmen trying to tell Jane, you sound exactly like bloody Pamela. And then Pamela was there and was like, oh no, I didn't know you didn't like me. And now Carmen feels bad. And she went outside to go talk to Pamela, and instead she found Gary. And Gary said, no more getting irritated, no more getting angry. They looked up at the starred night sky. He handed her one of her cigarettes and lit it for her, which touched her, considering how much he disapproved. There's something else that's upsetting you, though, he said gently. And I think I know what it is. It's because the end of the week's coming and you don't know what you're going to do afterwards. It's all a little bit of an anticlimax, isn't it? Carmen only drew on her cigarette with trembling hands. He carried on quietly. It's sad when you're just getting to know people really deeply, and then you suddenly realize that you're going to lose them. She nodded. In a sense, that was the reason. She had got to know them, and now they were all one by one, slipping quietly away from her, over the dividing line where she couldn't follow, where she didn't want to follow, from where they could not return. But you see, you don't have to lose touch. You don't have to go off immediately. There's another course, much more relaxed than this one, and I think I could persuade them to let you come along. His warmth, his proximity, his intimate solicitude made her feel terribly grateful to him, terribly fond of him. He was always there when she needed solace. Sweetie, that's called trauma bonding. You spend however many hours a day being made fun of and criticized and called stupid and ostracized on purpose and mentally abused and gaslit. So when someone shows you like the tiniest iota of manners, you're just like, I love you. We're soulmates. You're always there when I need you. Let's get married. Like, that's how that works. Oh my God. I'm going on the 21 day and I don't want to leave you behind. I want to know you're coming with me. Can I put your name down? That's closing with action if ever there was. Oh my gosh. That's a sales technique. Oh, no, it would have been if it was closing with action, he would have had the list in his hand and been like, how do I spell your last name? Carmen is Carmen, right? Last name? That's closing with action. She shook her head. It was hard to say no straight out when he looked so dog-like and pleading. It was hard to say it, but it was not hard to know it very, very surely inside. The time had passed when Lucy was anything like a good enough excuse to subject herself to something she didn't understand, but that felt so dangerous. This isn't a good time to ask me, she said. I shouldn't be making decisions now, not when I'm so tired and confused and my brain's exploding all over the place. Honestly, Gary, I can't quite explain it to you, but I get this very weird, baffled sensation in my head. He nodded sympathetically, and she felt an overwhelming, irrational desire to confide in him, to tell someone how peculiar she felt. I mean, I feel like a pinball machine. It's like there's a silver ball bearing inside, flipping about loose, and it's shooting everywhere and setting off lights and buzzers. That's the only way I can explain it. It's not a good time for anyone to put pressure on me, that's all I'm saying. It's exactly the time to make a decision, he insisted. Hold on to that confusion. Don't let it go. He was nodding firmly as though he recognized the symptoms exactly. When you feel confusion in your heart, that's God and Satan doing battle. They're both pulling you this way and that, and it creates a feeling of confusion. But if you just go with that, if you just persevere and see it through, you know what happens next? She shook her head dumbly. He seemed unreasonably intense and excited. Suddenly, there will be this most intense moment of clarity and inner revelation. Something will just go snap. He clicked his fingers as though her consciousness was no more important than an elastic band. It's the most wonderful feeling. Everything suddenly becomes very calm and very clear, and what you haven't understood before will just click into place. Hold on to it, Carmen. See it through. Satan wants your heart, but God needs it much more. Sorry, I'm having a flashback to when I was a teenager and I was kicked out of my Mooney operated living facility. So I had to find the first job I could. And I didn't realize you could get paid to fundraise until I got sucked into like the recruiting funnel of a Credit Co subsidiary. And if you know anything about Credit Co, they are in an international pyramid scheme that's like barely legal somehow. And they're impossible to crack down on almost because technically speaking, Credit Co is like a broker and these private businesses all have unique names depending on who's owning it. So you don't really know that you're signing up to work for Credit Co. You think you're signing up to work for a business with a completely different business name. And then you find out it's a franchise of Credit Co, basically. But like there was a moment where I was still considering myself in the church. I knew I didn't like Reverend Moon's kids and the way the church center in New York was run. But I joined this sales company and it felt so similar to being at a workshop because we were standing up and talking and dancing and singing so often and recruiting new people and like had secrets that you didn't tell new people. It was just like, I was like a fish in water. It was so natural for me. And when I went to my first or second conference, like tri-state or tri-city conference, I remember having a spiritual high and writing an email to my boss that is so embarrassing to look at now. But I was just like, I finally get it. I'm never going to work another job in my life. This is like, we're really out here doing things that nobody else is prepared to do. Like this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And just like so confident. And I sent him that email because that's what central figures in the Moonies would want me to say. And it like weirded him out. And he kept making jokes about the Hare Krishnas. And I didn't get it because I didn't know who the Hare Krishnas were. But like, and I was just on automatic pilot. I was just like, literally the only conversations I knew how to have was to have a spiritual experience, a spiritual high, and then tell someone about my spiritual high and be rewarded for having a spiritual high. I didn't know how to have any other sort of social interaction. I was like, why are you telling jokes about a completely different group I've never heard of that has nothing to do with me? I didn't get that like in his brain, the Moonies and the Hare Krishnas were in the same category. To me, the Moonies were a completely legitimate religion and the Hare Krishnas were a bunch of weirdos who did things like live on compounds and cook food for each other and sing songs. Who does that? Not me. We have chore time where we offer sustenance for each other and we have song sessions. It's different. It's different. I swear, cognitive dissonance. It's the most wonderful feeling. Everything suddenly becomes very calm and very clear, and what you haven't understood before will just click into place. Hold on to it, Carmen. See it through. Satan wants your heart, but God needs it much, much more. It's not my heart, it's my brain. Look, he said, when someone's confused, they have to put their trust in someone who's not confused. They have to turn to someone who can see more clearly. Isn't that so? You have to trust me. She looked at his pleading, trustworthy face with infinite distrust. Gary, she said quietly, my brain is confused because I'm tired, because I'm never ever alone for a single moment of the day, because everyone keeps battering on and on and on and on at me, because people keep telling me things that I know aren't true, and they keep telling me with such certainty that my brain is going on overdrive and trying to keep up with it all, and it just can't cope. She ended in an infuriated squeal. I'm not confused. People are confusing me. Hey, calm down, he said. Let's just talk this out, shall we? He guided her gently to sit beside him on the cold stone step. She lit another cigarette. Look, Carmen, he said, if you genuinely think that people are trying to confuse you, well, he shook his head. I don't know, but there must be something wrong in your reasoning. Nobody wants anything but the best for you. Do you think I would have spent all this time praying and trying to help you unless I really thought I had something very precious and special to pass on. Maybe I get a bit intense. Maybe we all do. But that's just because we're so anxious to share something very beautiful with you. And people think you have something special, or they wouldn't want to trust you with it. They wouldn't care so much or feel so desperately anxious for you to have it. Well, everyone's got to have it anyway. So I understood, said Carmen sullenly. The people who come to the truth the soonest are the most blessed, and so are their families, he pointed out. You can't just turn your back on a great truth, capital T, when you hear it. You can't say, I'll come back later. You have to commit to it while it's on offer. Maybe Heavenly Father doesn't give you a second chance. This is a sales tactic called fear of loss. So even if there is no deadline, like they've already established early in this workshop, they do these workshops constantly all over the world, and that they're going to continue doing them until everyone's converted, right? So by their own logic, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Carmen saying, I need to think on this. I want to go home and ponder things for a while. I want to wait until I've had a good night's sleep and eaten food before I make a decision to spend 21 days in this kind of environment when I'm already feeling this upset in a 7-day environment. But he's creating an artificial deadline. He's creating a sense of urgency and a fear of loss. So the sense of urgency is like when you hear a great universal truth that will save your family and generations of your ancestors from sin and suffering. If you have the key to the question of what is the purpose of life, you're supposed to take it, you dumb bitch. What are you, selfish? What are you, ungrateful? Like the fact that you're here first and you're early makes you more blessed than anyone else. You better not spit in God's face by saying, no, I don't want the answer to life, the universe, and everything. I'd rather go back to being ignorant and selfish. You know what I'm saying? So that's a sense of urgency. And then the fear of loss is you have to take it while it's on offer, or you might not get a second chance. I'm inviting you, I'm asking. He's creating this illusion of exclusivity, right? Even though they've very openly said they are going to recruit everyone on the planet. He's like, I'm going to ask if you can come along to this workshop that I'm going to. I'm going to ask if I can get your name on the list. Because it's exclusive and we're only holding it every month forever on rotation until we convert everyone. But it's very exclusive. And if you don't take this invitation now, I might not invite you again. Like, it's kind of like how diamonds are not rare at all, and the diamond industry creates the illusion of scarcity so they can continue to charge people exorbitant amounts for these tiny rocks that are actually pretty easy to come by. But then the margin of profit on these slave labor collected diamonds wouldn't be as high. So you got to create the illusion of scarcity, you know, or how like name brand clothes are all technically made in the same factory in China as your Forever 21 and your H&M. They just stick a different brand name on it. And you're literally paying that extra money for like the cost of clout and like marginally better materials sometimes. You know, sometimes it's hand sewn in a slightly better sweatshop in the same country, but they all come from slave-owned manufacturing businesses that are cheaper than getting a US citizen or a US prison labor slave to do it. US prison labor slaves are too busy making McDonald's uniforms, putting out fires instead of firefighters doing it, like the tricky fires that might kill people. They just send teams of American slaves, aka the imprisoned population, to do it. We have slaves, aka the prison population, cleaning our roads for us, creating anything that wants to have a Made in America sticker on it sometimes. If you want a Made in America sticker for cheap, you pay for slaves to do it. It's kind of like that. I'm going on a tangent. I had too much caffeine today. I'm not supposed to have caffeine, but I started drinking kombucha and it's like just the right amount of caffeine. On a roll. Anyway, let's focus. But yeah, to wrap that up, it's to create the illusion of scarcity and the illusion of wealth. The truth is, fancy brand names clothes are not worth any more than other clothes. You just pay more, and that's what makes them worth more. And diamonds aren't rare. You just pay more to make them make yourself think they're rare. You're going to get invited again. I'm just going to tell you that you're not, to make you move faster. The washing machine again. The salesman was making it hard to order and only available to a few privileged customers. If it was a great truth, she said testily, people would be able to answer questions about it. He looked at her, mildly hurt. That was a good zinger. If it's a great truth, you would know how to describe it instead of telling me I'm dumb and arrogant for saying that I understand it. Okay, definitely too much caffeine. He looked at her, mildly hurt. I've always tried to answer your questions, haven't I? What questions do you want answered? Ask me, he prompted her gently. Ask me anything you want, and I'll do my best. She watched her smoke rise. She had a sense that their conversation was all part of the same closed cycle. Accurate. Arguing about her confusion and about whether they answered questions or not still allowed him to continue doing more of the same, to continue telling her that black was white. Arguing was integral to the whole methodology of the breaking down process. That's actually a method of mental abuse, is constantly questioning that person's reality and second guessing everything they say. Just sort of in thought correctly. The same weary treadmill could go on indefinitely until her poor abused brain would turn traitor and refuse to process anymore. Then things really would become calm and clear. Okay, she said once her cigarette had burnt halfway down. Okay, there's something I need to understand about the last days. He nodded and sat back against the step, his hands locked around his knees, confident that he was primed for anything she might throw at him. She decided to throw a lot. Ooh, let's get into this. The restoration, capital R, is coming very soon, right? She asked purposefully. The kingdom of heaven on earth, all capital. That's imminent? He nodded. Within our lifetime, she pursued. He nodded again. And everyone will be supremely happy. We'll all love each other equally. There won't be any sin or selfishness or crime. Everyone will sing and smile, and there won't be any individuals. We'll all just be the same. We'll have faces and personalities, he objected, but the personalities will all be roughly similar. When everyone grows to perfection, there wouldn't be any differences, no, he said rather coldly. And there wouldn't be any books or plays or culture or anything like that. In fact, the whole of Western culture we could pretty well junk, she said cheerfully. We'll take some of the good things, but not the satanic parts, he said. There'll be books, God-centered films. Everything God-centered. It'll be like you see here. We have an immensely rich cultural life in the family. You do? We just watched The Sound of Music for the 12th time. What you see here is the kind of culture that pleases God. So that's the kind of culture we'll have on a global scale. What old songs and little skits? She asked. He flushed. God likes corny things, he said. Wow, I can't believe he just said it flat out like that. God likes corny things, he said. The things we do here are the things God likes, but there will be new God-centered songs too. God-centered songs too. But honestly, Carmen, he gave a little start of impatience and recrossed his legs. What difference does it make what the culture is? The point is surely that God's perfect plan should be fulfilled on earth. Isn't that mind-blowing? She nodded. He carried on. I mean, the old culture would be pretty irrelevant. Culture as we know it in Satan's world, well, it's all based on conflict and struggle. Since there wouldn't be any conflict or struggle, even the memory of it would have faded. Well, then books and things would be irrelevant, wouldn't they? Carmen slowly stubbed her cigarette out on the granite. Her brow was furrowed. She had the feeling that they were discussing something so vital, so fundamental, that she hardly knew where to begin defending it. He was telling her that none of it mattered, that books didn't matter. But didn't books represent the storehouse of human knowledge? Weren't they the mirror of an infinitely complex universe, recording what had been and what might be to come? Without books, there would be no reference points, no touchstone for ideas, achievements, mistakes, and no material for independent thought. The world would be the world circumscribed by the Messiah, and any ideas that might circulate about it would be the ideas promulgated by the Messiah. And maybe that man would be a false Messiah, but no one in the world that Gary described would have the knowledge or the vocabulary to challenge him. So in that moment, she's sort of like, and I know that this is a character that someone wrote after weeks and months, maybe a year or more of deliberation, but like the character of Carmen is just quickly piecing together how thought reform works, how information control works, and behavior control works. You're not reading or writing books that are stimulating because of their cultural significance or because your own unique sense of taste brought you to that book and you want to have spontaneous, unique thought of your own and make your own creative connections. We don't do that in the Moonies. We approved books that we know God loves, and we know what God loves because we have a man who speaks directly to God, because he is the second coming of Christ who also speaks directly to Christ, to Jesus. He's got a big red phone on his desk, kind of like how the president has a big red phone and he can call people, and that's like Reverend Moon, but the other guy on the other end of the big red phone on Reverend Moon's desk is Jesus and or God. Jesus of Nazareth and God pass the other red phone receiver back and forth, and they're like, Reverend Moon, this is what we want you to tell everyone. And Reverend Moon's like, kamsamnida, and hangs up the phone and tells everyone that he wants this and this and this and this all the way. By the way, they also said that Korea is the best. Oorah. Like, that's how that works in the Moonies. And it's like this false sense of something that I've been coming to terms with this week is like missing this false sense of having every single thing in life figured out and explaining that every single form of suffering, preventable or otherwise, is a sign that you're either making God happy or making God unhappy and making Satan happy. There's no such thing as coincidence. You attract everything in your reality, natural disaster, global pandemic, or otherwise, into your reality with the quality of your soul, and by proving to the spirit world that you are aligned with God or you're aligned with Satan. And if you're aligned with Satan for 45% of the day instead of 100% of the day being committed to God, then you give Satan 45% more opportunity to send bad shit your way. And you're not quite doing enough to balance out the bad shit. And it's sort of like in that alternate universe where all human suffering is preventable if you just behave well enough and do what we tell you to do. There's no need for culture. There's no need for art. There's no need for artistic performances. There's no need to study art, because art will not exist when we've eradicated all human suffering by overachieving and outperforming everyone. And it's like, I've had to ask myself this week, like, why am I constantly trying to improve myself? Like, who am I trying to be? How much more efficient or focused or disciplined can I get? Like, where's the finish line? Like, what am I trying? I catch myself. I might not be using the same terminology, but I've got this just like relentless forward driving momentum and like singular vision to become the best, fill in the blank, whatever it is. And I'm like, what am I trying to do? Like, what's so wrong with appreciating who I am in this moment, in this lifetime, on the earth, exactly as it is right now, with all the fucking ugly bits and all the non-negotiable trauma? What's so wrong with that? What's so wrong with accepting that there are parts of this life that really fucking suck, that are out of my control, that I cannot do anything about, and that don't make a good story or a good movie? Because it's not satisfying at all. It is the opposite of satisfying. It is the opposite of a well-written story. It's so ugly. I don't ever want to see a movie like this, and I'm angry that this memory lives in my head. Can I love and appreciate that experience instead of trying to perfect myself to the point where I eradicate being human? I eradicate participating in the same reality as everyone else. Like, isn't that what we're all trying to do when we try to perfect ourselves and try to get bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more and more? More fit, build more muscle, lose more fat, clean out more of your pores, get more and more plastic surgery and more lip fillers, read more and more spiritual books, collect more and more crystals, go to more and more spiritual retreats, go to more and more self-improvement career seminars, right? Do better and better and better and better and better. Holy shit, this is a rerun of westward expansion and the whole manifest destiny bullshit that old white men have been using as an excuse to murder people for centuries. Where are you going? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? What's the finish line? Is God going to give you a big, huge trophy full of brownies and gold stars? Like what? Where does it end? How much is enough? Like, I don't know. Like for me, it ends right here. I'm learning to be grateful for everything I have and what the world is right fucking now. And instead of trying to make money or achieve things to become a different person and change my reality because I hate my current reality, I'm trying to be a person who loves my own current reality so much that people are literally begging to give me money to experience more of my vibe. They're just like, you know how you love being alive and you love being in your body and you love doing what you do all the time? Can you do what you do all the time over here? For 3 days, I'll pay you this much money. Can you do what you do, but like let me buy the things you're making after you do what you do so that I can pretend that I made it myself? Like, I did this last time too. I need to find a new hand motion that's not like chef's kiss. But it's such a good hand motion. It's just delicioso. I feel like that's talking about the difference between an external locus of control and an internal locus of control. The Moonies, like so many other multi-billion-dollar corporations, try to get your money and your time by convincing you external things are in your control. So you need to create an external locus of control. External things are more important than your internal state of being. And I don't think that's true. Everybody's quiet today. Only a few more pages. Okay. What are you going to do with the books? She asked mildly. He looked rather irritated and taken aback, as though the question was so far off the point he could see no value in following it up. Well, I can't see it matters what we do with them. I suppose they'll be disposed of. She stared at the rubber toe caps of her trainers against his shiny pointed shoes. They might as well be, mightn't they? She agreed, if nobody can read them. He seemed unaware of any irony in her voice. She carried on. So there'd be no need of books. There wouldn't be any sort of fantasy or variation. People wouldn't imagine things or dream things or hope for anything. She was trying to picture it for herself. It was a strange discovery to have a glimpse of heaven and realize you didn't want it. There'd be nothing to strive for. What would there be to strive for? He asked. We'll have everything we want as a reality. There's no need to hope and dream when you have everything you want. But what if it doesn't make us happy? It will make us happy, he said stubbornly. If it doesn't make us happy, that will only be because we have remnants of Satan's consciousness left. But once we reach perfection and break away totally from Satan, then it will make us perfectly, eternally happy. I feel like that's every ad I've ever seen in my life. If you buy this face wash, you will be happy because you will have completely removed the remnants of Satan from your pores. You will have separated yourself from the absolutely vile and disgusting reality that is sebum and dust and dead skin cells. And you will be perfectly, eternally happy. Just like this lovely, smiling model that we have airbrushed beyond all recognition for the purposes of our advertisement to sell this fallacy to you. Wouldn't make me happy, she said darkly. Yes, but that's because you seem to think culture's the be-all and end-all. It seems to me it's a pretty selfish, trivial attitude to want to stop the kingdom of heaven coming just because you're used to a culture of conflict. Hold on, God, he mocked. Don't bring perfect happiness on the earth just yet. Carmen wants other people to suffer and struggle so she can read about it. I didn't say other people, said Carmen. I'm saying I'm prepared to struggle and suffer because that's what being human is. In return, I have the right to dream and hope for things. Where the fuck is my highlighter? I'll go highlight that later. But your dreams will always turn out hollow, he objected. Your hopes will all get crushed and end in disappointment. Says who? Like, she was about to object, but he went on. Even when we love someone, it turns stale and goes wrong. One person grows indifferent and the other person suffers. Or maybe we have a deep love for a parent or a child and something terrible happens to them, or they get sick and die. Yes, you can dream and hope, all right, but don't tell me a world like that can offer true happiness. When you don't understand why relationships go wrong, what if, like, instead of assigning those uncomfortable emotions and that uncomfortable turn of events to Satan, what if you like learned about attachment styles and learned how to communicate your feelings better and learned how to respect other people's boundaries better and like set your own boundaries better? What about that? What if, like, instead of insulting every academic who has ever studied the field of like human motivation and neuroscience and psychology and counseling, like, what if you actually listened to the hundreds of years of research that all of them have done and are still doing to this day? Just a thought. Yeah, I'm just going to throw that out there. His tone was so scathing that she wondered what the world had done to him to make him despise it so, or whether he'd been away from it too long to remember the small, insignificant human moments that made it a thing of wonder. Yes, terrible things sometimes happen, said Carmen, but when you're human, that's the chance you take. Good things happen too. Good things come out of struggle as well as bad things. Loving anything is a risk, but you can't not do it just because it's dangerous. Maybe you love someone very deeply and then they die and it makes you think life's very cruel. She was going to add lightly, that's why I don't believe in a God, but something stopped her, a certain loyal pact between herself and the darkness she had prayed to lately. The truth was that every day she was coming into closer touch with a source of strength and goodness, and as long as it continued to inspire her actions and protect her, she was becoming less particular about whether she called it God or not. I felt that. The truth was that every day she was coming into closer touch with a source of strength and goodness, and as long as it continued to inspire her actions and protect her, she was becoming less particular about whether she called it God or not. That's why some people don't believe in God, she said. They can't believe in a God who's callous, who strikes people down at random. And yet, if I had to choose, she was formulating the idea even as she spoke, and she was surprised at her own certainty. Girl, same. That's what every one of these live streams are for me. I wouldn't exchange a world where people loved and lost and suffered for one where people never suffered but didn't love at all. So maybe the balance of love and suffering is necessary. Maybe God made it the way it has to be. Gary was shaking his head quite firmly. No, God didn't plan the world to be some terrible, frightening lottery. He intended it to be a world of perfect love, a world where we all love one another equally, where we don't have any understanding of sorrow and we feel no pain. Carmen grimaced, trying hard to find the idea beautiful, but it just sounded like living under ecstatic anesthesia. But if you loved everyone equally, it wouldn't be love at all, she said. You have to know what it is to not love someone to understand what it is when you do love someone. If there wasn't any suffering and there wasn't any risk of pain, you could feel the same emotion towards just anyone. Well, that wouldn't be love. That would be something else, some sort of lowest common denominator. Somebody just zoom in on my face and play the sound of guns in the distance, just war sounds, like having a "that's so Raven" moment. Excuse me for spacing out real quick. Oh my god. Hello, plants. How you doing? Maybe this kingdom of yours is full of something else, like good-natured friendliness or something, but it can't be full of love. You can't love everyone equally. You can't spread love out, or it just gets thinner. She could sense that he was angry, but he veiled his eyes and made an effort to speak in a gentle, warm way. Love shouldn't be a tawdry, selfish, individualistic thing, he told her. It shouldn't be something that cuts other people out. When it's as powerful as God meant it to be, it's so strong, you couldn't keep it to yourself. You'd want to share it. You'd want to pass it on. Pass It On is the name of a holy song that they sing repeatedly. Just saying. This is the meaning of the Messiah's love, a new kind of love. Songs with lyrics about a new world, the new world, the new world, the kingdom of heaven, the new kind of love everywhere. He's word for word regurgitating holy songs at this point. A new kind of love, so overwhelming that we can't appreciate it with a selfish heart. He meant hers. The kind of love you see around you in the family. The kind of love she saw around her, Carmen thought, was only cloying camaraderie. It wasn't the sharp, intense yearning of real love that was jealous of its object. She wondered how he could have forgotten what the real thing was. He sat forward eagerly to press his advantage. This is the dream God wanted us to have, he breathed. The dream to end all dreams. And now, at last, it's coming true. A dream that promises the end to sickness, crime, and war. It would be the most incredible perversity to say you didn't want it. I don't want it all the same, she muttered. Gary leaned back, staring at her with a mounting, incredulous anger. The whole history of theological debate has centered around this one dilemma. If there's a God, why does he allow us to suffer? And now someone solves the whole question logically and scientifically and gives you the answer on a plate. An answer that generations of theologians and philosophers had prayed for throughout the history of the world. What's more, he gives you the means to eradicate the ills of mankind. And what do you say? You say it was a dumb question and you don't want it? He laughed ironically. Come on, Carmen, you're an intelligent girl. That really is some arrogance. He was rattled. She suddenly had a sense that she was onto something. Maybe everyone who had ever passed through those walls, being carried inexorably onwards towards the light as though on a perpetual conveyor belt, maybe they had argued themselves blue in the face about talking snakes, archangels, God's heart, and the crucifixion and so on. But no one had ever dared to suggest that the final vision wasn't beautiful. She felt as though she had just glimpsed a lever. When the restoration comes, what are you going to do with people like me who don't want it? She asked softly. Everyone will want it. Everyone will come to be re-educated. But that makes it sound like, I don't know, some sort of communist thought reform. So this right here, I feel like the author is extrapolating. I don't think people ever would have said re-educated. I think they would have used some other corny, wholesome country bumpkin phrase that's like, everyone will want to be part of a loving family. Everyone wants to be loved. And I think it's interesting that the author is taking time to say re-educated and bring up thought reform, because thought reform is the official term for like brainwashing. Brainwashing is like the really extra annoying like slang term for thought reform. Thought reform is like a thing you can study and read books about. Brainwashing you can read books about, but it's people telling you that brainwashing is thought reform and that cults are using thought reform techniques developed by government organizations and used by the CIA on prisoners and stuff. No, he said impatiently, communist thought reform is Satan's plan. This is God's plan. So you haven't actually disagreed with the statement that this is thought reform. You're just saying, no, that's Satan's way of thought reform. That's thought reforming people for Satan. We're thought reforming people for God. Kind of missed that one, Gary. But it's the same bloody plan, she squealed, suddenly infuriated. It's just a different ideology. The muscles of his face were taut. She had never seen him so twitchy and ill at ease. And her saying bloody was a personal affront, because if you say curse words, you have made your mouth dirty. It's like I can see the dusty little sins residual on your mouth after saying a curse word. You say a curse word and it's like those little dusty demons from a Hayao Miyazaki movie from Spirited Away, all those little dusty guys that like scutter around and have little eyeballs and little legs. That's what comes out of your mouth when you say a swear word. It's like, Maybe that's why we watched Totoro and Spirited Away, because it allowed us to like conceptualize what demons and spirits looked like. Wow. She said bloody, and a little dusty Satan demon went up. Just, and Gary's offended that she said bloody. Oh my God. Oh my God. That's a Vine. I miss Vine. The ideology is the crucial point, he said. We have to defeat communism. Satan stole God's beautiful plan, and now we're justified in taking it back and using it for good. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. But how are you going to defeat the people who aren't communists, who just don't want God's plan? Gary shook his head as though it was unthinkable. That's what would happen, Gary, she said insistently. Believe me, not everyone would want it. People would resist it like they've resisted every great ideology. Believe me, there will be small caucuses of people who don't want to come. She made the caucuses small so as to not tax his credulity. She was well on the way to entering fully into his reality in order to put across her point. She felt for a wild moment that if they could really meet somewhere in the vast, dark future fantasy that was his reality, she could make him see its flaw, and he would have to reject it. She was using all her powers of visualization to conjure it up for herself. It was like some great dark housing estate on a hill. It was night, but every house was blazing with candles, and the people inside were smiling and radiant, and their faces were bland and empty. They weren't doing anything because there wasn't anything to do. Matthew was leading a singing crocodile of members down the hillside. They were heading towards the only darkened house. The house was barred and locked, but there was a telltale crucifix in the neglected window, and for a fleeting moment, some pale and frightened faces pulled back the curtain and peered out at the joyful, purposeful members as they groped around the door, singing with determined menace. Consider yourself at home. Consider yourself one of the family. We've taken to you so strong, it's clear we're going to get along. Consider yourself our mate. We don't want to have no fuss. The thought almost made her laugh, although it was not so funny when she thought how bright Gary was, how his intelligence had been warped and harnessed to this impossible dream. Believe me, it wouldn't work, she said sensibly. There'd be people who'd resist. You couldn't get them to a center, let alone to listen to a lecture. What will the family do? Will they use force? And if force doesn't work, will they kill them or what? If you have perfect love, you can't use force. You can't kill people, can you? She was so sure that she understood the concept of perfect love, capital P, capital L, that she expected him to agree straight away. Gary hesitated. Carmen realized with a shock then that perfect love, capital P, capital L, did not necessarily exclude force or violence. Real full circle moment here with me, Carmen. It's like you could hear what I was thinking about at the beginning of this chapter. Synchronicities. I mean, she said carefully, her eyes closely watching his face. You couldn't get rid of sin and crime and suffering by committing sin and crime and causing suffering, now could you? Heavenly deception. We have to do anything to save people, including lie to them. Well, it would depend, Gary said in an offhand way. Sometimes God has to use Satan's tools to undo Satan's evil works. Oh, said Carmen. She thought quickly. Is that why Reverend Moon has the armaments factory? Where did you hear that? Asked Gary, but only as though it was of passing interest. He didn't seem shocked or try to deny it, so I read that totally wrong. Let me read that again. Where did you hear that? Asked Gary, but only as though it was of passing interest. He didn't seem shocked or try to deny it. I can't remember now. I just heard it, she said. I assumed the press just made it up. Look, killing isn't necessarily wrong, particularly not in wars, he said, and particularly not in the last battle, capital L, capital B, in the holiest war of all. There might be circumstances where a small evil could contribute to the greater good. I'm not saying that's so in the family, he added hastily. I mean, some of these questions are a bit far advanced for me. You know, I'm not very high up in the family. I'm still only learning myself. The person to ask would be a center leader. So that's like appealing to authority and saying that, like, I don't know how to answer these questions that are derailing my indoctrination. And that's because I'm not an authority figure, and someone who's more qualified than me knows how to answer this question. Oh, hi, Emmy. Thank you so much for sharing. Sure, I could buy this book and read it myself, but I tune in live or after the fact to hear your comments and reactions. It makes me feel like I'm not crazy. I got you. That's why I do this. Saying it out loud and seeing comments makes me feel like I'm not crazy too. Sweet. Mm, oh, I was gonna say, so this last battle and stuff, I really thought that this was something that I made up, putting together the events of like the presidential election and the way that tech data was used to target people who are susceptible to propaganda and fake news. Um, like I thought I was unique when I started thinking to myself, like the Cold War never ended. We're still in the midst of an actually very intense ideological war. It's just that our weapons have advanced to the point where we don't need to blow up buildings and we don't need to kill people. We can brainwash them and indoctrinate them and enslave them without disrupting their daily routine very much. We can get them to behave as though we've already conquered their country with force without spending money on weapons or killing anyone or even letting anyone consciously understand what's going on. And I wish I had come up with that. I wish that was an idea that came from my head, but I just realized I actually was hearing first generation members say that constantly growing up. And I pushed it out of my memory and I brought it back when it seemed to apply. And I told myself that I came up with it, but it was stuff that first generation had been talking about in the Moonies. And they were saying that we were the ones who got it right and everyone was going to applaud us and congratulate us. And that's why Reverend Moon needs a marble palace in Korea, is because everyone's going to see he was generations ahead of his time. And everyone is going to be so incredibly grateful for us staying woke while everyone has been deceived by weapons of war that are imperceptible to the human eye, that happen without your conscious knowledge. They're going to be so grateful to us. They're going to celebrate us. They're going to hang our faces on a hall of fame somewhere and say, thank you for acting crazy and for putting up with us when we persecuted you. You saved us. You were humanity's only hope. You were the Obi-Wan Kenobi to our fucking Star Wars Princess Leia trapped by the Death Star type situation. Thank you so much for doomsday prepping and telling us all that the last days were coming. The last days are here now and we should have believed you. Fucking oh, Cthulhu. I need cooler explicatives that don't have to do with Jesus. Isn't that interesting how we're all being brainwashed constantly to still act Christian by saying Christian explicatives? Okay, let's finish this chapter. But if you're committed to this is going to happen in your lifetime, she said, appalled. Surely you must know what you're committed to. Surely you must have thought it through. I like this. She's getting her teeth out. It's just her and Gary, and she's like ballsier now. Gary had a troubled look on his face. She had a feeling that he was really with his old random brain. His eyes were narrowed and he looked almost as though he was in pain. Okay, this seems like a joke or an exaggeration, but that is exactly what I looked like a matter of months ago when I would do that Instagram filter that asked me to make a unique decision that depended on my personality and only my personality and my preferences. I kept trying to say that I could pick both. You know, those Instagram either or filters? And they're like, do you like hot drinks or cold drinks? And I'd sit there and I'd like be trying to use my unique brain and my own unique trains of thought. And I'd be like, I don't know. I have recordings of it. I'll put it up somewhere. Gary had a troubled look on his face. Faith had a troubled look on her face. Thanks, guys. Gary had a troubled look on his face. She had a feeling that he was really thinking with his old random brain. His eyes were narrowed and he looked almost as though he was in pain. She could almost hear the wheels of the mechanism creaking with disuse. When God's on your side, he said, when you're fighting for God and the salvation of the world, she had the sense that he was running through the lectures in his head in order to make a correct deduction. If the whole human race depends on your victory, then sometimes it might even be better for a person that they got killed. I mean, if someone was going to lose their soul to Satan, it might be better for them in the end to just lose their body in this world. He gave up, his face strained with the effort of thought, and shook his head. I'm not sure, he said in a normal voice. You'd have to ask a center leader. Ask Matthew, he'll be able to tell you. Carmen stared up into the night sky. It was irrational to give their megalomaniac vision any credence, but since she had broken through the barrier into envisaging the reality of what they saw ahead, she felt compelled to make him go further. In her own mind, the jolly band of pilgrims that were bearing down on the shuttered house were now carrying pickaxe handles and beginning to batter down the door. What was more, other cheerful crocodiles of God's soldiers were bearing down on the other shuttered houses in the towns and cities, bearing their inexorable good news, waving free samples of their ginseng tea and brandishing their Korean machine guns. They were dragging people out into the street and loading whole families into oceanic seafood fish vans to take them off for re-education. I love what the author is doing right here because they do own an armament factory making Korean machine guns. They do put people in vans, and there were kidnappers dragging people in and out of vans. And we not the Moonies own one of the largest seafood distributing businesses. So like, I forget what the exact statistic is, and I'll have to re-listen to Elgin Straight's podcast that mentions it. But like, I think 2/3 or some massive amount of the world's sushi comes from the sushi company that the Moons own, that church members work at for a fraction of a normal wage. They literally have this little waiver at the top, and they're as a Moonie. We just want to remind you that suffering is close to godliness, and that the blank that we've left on this side is for you to write in the wage that you believe you deserve or that you want to receive. This is just a friendly reminder that all of the money that you do not take in your paycheck is going to be used to save people's souls and bring around the end to all sin and human suffering as we know it. So no pressure. We're just going to judge you immensely if you ask to be paid minimum wage instead of taking less than what this job is worth. And we're going to call you an asshole, and we're going to treat you differently if you ask to be paid appropriately. Like, triggered! Just turned me into a meme. I'll be an angry white girl talking about being triggered. What if people put up barricades and burn cars? And she cast wildly around, sabotage the family's re-education camps. And there you are, standing at your gun post with an Armalite rifle. You might have a bunch of old women and children in your sights. You might have me in your sights, for that matter, she added. What are you going to do then? Ask your center leader. Don't you want to know what you're committed to? Don't you want to know what the furthest extension of your commitment is? I don't know, he said remotely. God's plan is perfectly logical and it has to succeed. So whatever God told us through the center leaders, that would be right. Nothing must stand in the way of God's plan this time, otherwise everything's lost. Another interjection, right now, currently today, there is a faction of the Unification Church run by one of Reverend Moon's sons, his youngest son, that teaches children to stab and attack people, and requires all of its church members to own guns purchased from Car Arms. And all of their Sunday sermons talk about how the world is evil, how we are in the last days, and how you are going to have to fight and kill on behalf of Heavenly Father. That you are going to be asked to murder people who have been infected and overrun with Satan's consciousness. So it's interesting that she's using this as a thought experiment to try to shake Gary out of his indoctrination for a second. Word for word, Moonies and sects of what's left of the Moonies walk each other through this exercise and really do commit to murdering other people if necessary. And I think that ties back to the beginning of this podcast where we talk about BCs and first gen dying, and no one really caring. Like, obviously paying them respect, but it's like, I mean, the fact is we would kill ourselves rather than get kidnapped, which is what church members have done. Oh my God, I didn't even remember Japan when I was making a list of all the ways the UC is violent. Ingenim, or whatever her name really is, because Nim is a title of reverence in Korean. So I just like big upped her in Korean, but I don't know her real name. That doesn't include the title and the big up. One of Reverend Moon's daughters, when she was in charge of the US church before her illegitimate child and scandal came public and she went off into hiding and now just runs a really lame YouTube channel. Um, she showed us a bunch of news coverage that might have been made up, but it might have been real. And it was like church members who had been kidnapped by their non church family and been locked in apartments and starved and raped to try to break their faith by these expensive scam artist kidnappers. Like, that's the only side of protesting and non recruitment, like unrecruitment, that we were shown. Like, we were constantly being shown that outsiders hate us so much and are so infected by Satan. They are willing to pay $30 to $40 to $50,000 to hire a kidnapping team to come and torture your Mooney family member. And like, church members were instructed to kill themselves rather than be corrupted by Satan and betray the true parents. So even after like fundraising and living on a compound, when I tried to like work for the church and reintegrate into college, at Sunday services, I was being shown footage of like church members emaciated, like hadn't eaten more than a certain number of calories in years as a way to be released from their kidnapping. Or I was shown photos of church members who had killed themselves after being raped by kidnappers or had jumped from an apartment building during their deprogramming process. And that was the only exposure to kidnapping stories I had been given, was kidnappers being corrupt rapists and con artists, families not caring about the safety of their child, whether their child was in the Moonies or not, and subjecting them to torture in order to unbrainwash them. And Moonies dying rather than being separated from us. So it's interesting that she's like talking about this as a thought exercise, but like, it's not a hypothetical thought exercise. Moonies are literally willing to die and kill themselves and are constantly being told that if it comes down to it, you should kill other people. That's not what a real family does. That's not what a real religion does. That's what a human trafficking organization does. That's what a cult does. Just so you can hear someone say it. I don't know, he said remotely. God's plan is perfectly logical and it has to succeed. So whatever God told us through the center leaders, that would be right. Nothing must stand in the way of God's plan this time. Otherwise, everything's lost. What if it's me in your sights? Will you kill me? He sighed. Oh, this is a pointless discussion. You're just pushing it to ridiculous extremes. Why are we talking about killing people? Why can't we dwell on the wonderful happiness everyone's going to experience when the world is free from sin? So now he's avoiding the topic. Because if you're asking me to get involved with this movement, there are certain things I have to know, things that don't add up. Like, for instance, in the love lecture, Matthew said, love overcomes ideology. And that's true, isn't it? You couldn't shoot your own mother. If it came down to it, your love for your mother would overcome your ideology. His eyes were evasive. Love overcomes ideology, he agreed cautiously, and perfect love, capital P, capital L, overcomes all ideologies. She stopped, confused. Was that logical? It's sort of like the no true Scotsman argument, but applied to the definition of love. Because to be honest with you, English is an extraordinarily limited language, like a problematically simple language. Like, there are so many more vocabulary words that we steal from other languages, like resume. Zeitgeist is a German word that we've stolen. Like, English has very few vocabulary words compared to a lot of other languages. And so the word love, it's very easy to change the definition of love and say essentially overcomes ideologies, but if it can overcome, if it's not as powerful as like thought reform and indoctrination, it's not real love. It's not pure love. You see what I'm saying? If love doesn't fit my definition of what I want love to be, then love is not real love. You're not talking about true love. No true Scotsman would XYZ. That's a fallacy. A well acknowledged, well studied, well documented fallacy that you can take college courses on, by the way. Was he saying the same thing or the direct opposite? They seemed to have a trick with words that always made everything mean its opposite. She felt tired and confused again. Suddenly, it seemed so shocking after all. It had only seemed shocking initially because organized Christian religions usually opposed killing. But then, didn't the established churches sanction atomic weapons, which went strictly against the commandments? And was the family's vision any worse than what one read about Khomeini? I don't even know what that word is. It was only a mite more expansionist, that was all. And then they didn't talk about chopping people's hands off or summary executions. And what was more, the family's vision was only a dream that couldn't be put into practice. Gary took his opportunity to regain control of the conversation. So now she's tired because she doesn't have the stamina to overturn fallacy after fallacy after fallacy when she also depends on this person for dopamine and oxytocin in this dopamine fast environment, right? And now she's like justifying the Moonies and everything by saying, well, at least it's not the equivalent of Sumerian Babylonian law where people get their hands chopped off for stealing loaves of bread. You know, she's sort of like it's reminiscent of a woman in an abusive relationship being like, do I really have to leave? Because I mean, yeah, I've seen him hit other women and children in the face and give them a, but at least he's not violently raping and cutting and torturing them like Ted Bundy, you know? Like, and I'll see this in comments under certain Facebook posts of mine or Instagram posts of mine or videos on this channel where a Moonie who says, I'm so glad I found your channel, they're like, well, at least we're not. Well, at least I didn't. Well, at least I never. Well, at least we never. At least the unification. Shut up. You can always find some absolutely ridiculous, irrelevant moment in human history that makes anything look worse. Like you literally can. That does not in any way change the fact that the Moonies are a human trafficking organization that don't care if people die and go out of their way to put people in harm's way so that the Moons can live lavish. Don't ever get it twisted. And don't ever try to cheapen how awful this organization is by saying other people had it worse. The Holocaust was worse. The Crusades were worse. And then I'm sure being in Hiroshima while a nuke was being dropped is significantly worse than being beaten every day by your husband. But that doesn't change the fact that this is not okay. This is not a religion. This is a scam. This is a human trafficking scam. And this doctrine of peace and love that lots of people have gained a lot of really cool stuff from and made good memories around, like, that's great that you took a product and used it in a way that it was not meant to be used to create good moments in your life and create beautiful families and whatnot. But the fact is, this product, this doctrine was used to justify human trafficking. It's not a religion with a few bad experiences. It is a bad experience with a doctrine justifying all of those bad experiences and those crimes with happy and well-adjusted people as like an outlier side effect. You are rare if you have like a solid family, and no mental illnesses, nothing to complain about, no shared community trauma, no memories of people being beaten or humiliated or trafficked, you know, taking a moment to say it all out loud, not leaving anything behind on these live streams anymore. Y'all clicked on it. This shit might be 3 hours long. It won't be. I can't sit still for that long. We only have 2 pages. But like, I'm getting more and more comfortable taking up space. That's what it is. Gary took this opportunity to regain control of the conversation. But really, Carmen, I think it's you that's being unrealistic. You have to take things in by stages or the whole thing will overwhelm you. You're trying to run before you've learned to walk. Principle has to be unfolded gently, or of course you'll find it very confusing. Carmen was still turning it over in her mind, still trying to work out whether it was reasonable to find it disturbing. It seemed to her that if the restoration of the world was possible, which it was not, then there would be cause to be disturbed. But since it was not possible, it was equally disturbing that these perfectly pleasant and ordinary people around her should be turning themselves somehow into programmed robots for a hopeless cause. But she was not in a good mental state to decide what was disturbing and what wasn't. People believed some strange things in the name of religion. What if it's a lie? She asked suddenly. He seemed to be singing busily under his breath, which she found an incongruous reaction to such an important question. You're correct. It is an incongruous reaction because he doesn't think that you've asked a perfectly reasonable question. He thinks that you are possessed by Satan and that by sitting in close proximity to you and having this conversation, he is sitting next to someone who is a carrier of COVID. COVID is quite literally the perfect analogy for how Moonies think of Satan and satanic behavior. How everybody else in the world right now treats COVID and the idea of catching COVID, how Moonies react to the world. And I'm going to be honest here and say that I was very selfish and sort of secretly pleased when COVID lockdown happened because I was like, finally, everyone else has been knocked down a few pegs closer to my level. Everybody kind of is starting to get it and can picture what it's like to not trust the people around you because of things you can't see. You know? So he's whispering and singing under his breath because he literally believes that Reverend Moon has blessed melodies and songs with superpowers that will him from the spiritual germs that she is emitting, because the fact that she can't let this go and isn't submitting to his mental abuse is evidence that she is a gas bomb of satanic germs. I can't find my place. What if it's all a gigantic con? Suddenly, he stopped singing and looked at her, a direct, fierce, proud look, as though her question was both impertinent and beneath contempt. If it's a lie, it's a beautiful lie, and I give myself to it freely, he said. He got to his feet and helped her up. But you see, it isn't. And you know in your heart it isn't. The very fact that you ask means you're frightened. If it wasn't true, what would there be to be frightened of? But there is something to be frightened of. It's an incredible, frightening, beautiful truth with a capital T. You didn't ask for it, but now you've heard it. You can't walk away from it, and that's frightening. So now he's gaslighting her. Carmen kept her eyes down. She had no problem at all in turning down this truth, and she would have even less problem walking away from it. It wasn't frightening, it was terrifying. So he said lightly, shall I put you down for the 21 day? Your boy is persistent. She had a wild desire to laugh. She buried her face in her hands to stifle it. It was only late night hysteria, but the constant switching between enormous global concepts and complete mind-boggling inanity seemed too startlingly absurd. She made an effort to control herself, her hands steepled around her nose and her mouth, her eyes serious. I'll pray about it, she assured him, and with that he had to be content. As they walked into the house, the laughter captive at the back of her throat subsided and changed into something else entirely somber. It wasn't funny that he was trapped by. It wasn't funny that he should live 24 hours a day in another reality without release. It wasn't funny if they'd wrought these violent changes on her own sister. Once inside the hall, she wove her way towards Jane and hissed in an undertone, They are prepared to use violence, you know. But Jane just waved her hand wearily, as though she found Carmen's persistence too tiresome. Best, she said. Can't you just appreciate the good things? She circled her arm affectionately around Carmen's waist and drew her close as the next song began. Just listen to the singing. It's so beautiful. How can something so beautiful be wrong? She asked, and she began to sing. Carmen began to sing too. It seemed to be the only thing to do because there was nobody, no one at all, who shared her view that it was sinister. So maybe it wasn't sinister, or maybe it just wasn't worth worrying about. After all, she couldn't change it. It was going ahead anyway, with her or without her. Anyway, it was only an idea, and who could be afraid of an idea? The CIA and the FBI are afraid of ideas. The FBI was willing to shoot Martin Luther King over an idea. There's a whole list of really important, culturally significant heroes who were very, like, the government is open. We assassinated this person. We're going to put it on a .gov website. On this day, this department assassinated this person because of an idea. Oh, by the way, Martin Luther King was assassinated not because of his decades of racial equality ideas. He was assassinated when he started talking about universal basic income. He got assassinated when his conversation became intersectional and wasn't just benefiting the Black community. He was talking about uniting all impoverished communities and giving everyone a leg up and getting everyone invested in racial equality by talking about providing affordable housing for everyone of every color, not just the Black neighborhoods, and providing universal basic income for all Americans, not just Black Americans. That's what got him assassinated. He wasn't a problem when he was just this annoying guy talking about civil liberties for Black people. But when he started talking about uniting people of all races in a class conflict, that's when he got assassinated. Food for thought. Just going to leave that right there for you. Carmen began to sing too. Oh yeah, who could be afraid of an idea? She began to sway with Jane as the voices rose. It was a triumphant martial song, one of Carmen's favorites. Oh, you have favorites now, do you? Dawn, golden dawn, throughout the shining fatherland brings the tidings of the rising sun that gives us life. Golden Dawn is one of those organizations that gets listed in the same blog posts as like the Illuminati and the New World Order. I still don't fully understand what the Golden Dawn is. I just know that I've been singing about it since I learned to speak. And singing about Golden Dawn is part of how I learned to speak English. Gonna put a big old pin in that and add it to the laundry list of shit I need to Google about my own life. For fuck's sake, what is existence? We live in a simulation, and I'm tired, and I want to make a very calm, relaxing simulation for myself, because this shit triggered beyond words. That night she was called upon to give in her book of reflections I'm gonna breathe for a second. That night she was called upon to give in her book of reflections for inspection. She sat on the floor, scrutinizing it carefully for slips of errors in her thinking. The book was filled mostly with lame, vaguely spiritual waffle, which she had written to confuse Pamela, who insisted on reading the thing every night. Thus, the latest paragraph read, Went to bed very tired after a very powerful day, lecture very inspiring. What a wonderful world it would be if everyone could sing and smile and look at flowers all day. However, I do have a few questions. One, if you can't go to the spirit world without a body, how come Adolf Hitler's there? Perhaps he did not die in the bunker after all? What information do we have on this? Two, dinosaurs. I did not understand what Matthew said. Gary said God was just trying out a few things before he settled on the perfect shape. I think this is most unlikely. When I asked Matthew, he said dinosaurs were God's idea of a joke. Who was God having this joke with? I love these questions so much. The questions went down to the bottom of the page in a small, spiky hand, which was most unlike her normal writing. There were so many questions, and so many of them were so bizarre that she had a surreal sense of displacement as she ran her eye down them. It was as though her reality had split off into distinct and separate strands. She spent most of her time now operating in the alternative reality, and even these scribbles, which pretended to represent her private feelings, were couched in those terms. What she considered to be real, the everyday level of life, where she was a certain person with a certain past and a certain personality, to the family, this was not reality at all. I feel like I could talk for an hour just about that, how you have like your real self, and then you have the self that you sort of slip in once in a while to test the people around you. It's like halfway between your truth and their reality, but you say it in terms of their reality. And then there's just straight up pretending to care about what they care about and being in their reality because you have to, because you leave a double life. Like, so relevant. And it's so fascinating. I think I'm getting more and more excited because the more live streams I do, the more my body is learning, like, I can say what's been in this secret chamber of what's really real. I can say those things out loud without putting it into the Mooney reality, without translating it into Mooney terms first. And I won't get mentally abused for it. And I'll still have a place to live, and I'll still have friends, and I'll still be okay. Yes. It's like I'm teaching my nervous system this. That's what's happening. In fact, she herself had no reality for them outside her commitment to the group and its philosophy. Oh, these things that she's thinking. Okay. Since they dictated the terms on which human interaction took place, she was being forced to spend more and more time in their reality and outside her own. She wondered dimly if this could be in any way harmful to her, this schizophrenic flitting between two different systems of thought. No, sweetie, it's called code switching. It might be exhausting for you because you're white, but lots of immigrant children and Black American people have to code switch every day of their life. And that's the thing you can find articles about too, is like Black people today are willing to quit their jobs if they switch too much. It really doesn't matter if the job is blatantly racist. If the culture of that company requires them to code switch this hard, like this hard every day, that's a toxic enough work environment for a person of color to quit, as they should. So like, it's not good for you. It's not. But we require women and people of color and non-binary, non-gender conforming people to code switch into a reality that doesn't actually accommodate for real life and what being human is. Is that the source of schizophrenia and a whole bunch of mental disorders? I don't know. Maybe everyone should ask themselves that question. Maybe people should write theses on that question. It was certainly very tiring, but more than that, she worried whether the alternative reality, which was structured, minimalized, and controlled from above, could come to seem more vivid than the pale and random narrative of normal freeform thinking. My, you've been busy, said Pamela when she took Carmen's book and added it to the pile. Then she bent to zip up Carmen's sleeping bag, as though Carmen was a little girl, and wished her sweet dreams. As Carmen lay in her bag that night, she tossed and turned and thought it over and over. She examined all her fears and found them justified. Then she examined them again and found them to be demonstrations of the most extreme paranoia. Why was she so frightened of these people who others continually told her were very, very nice? Indeed, who were very nice. Sweetie, they're not nice. Like all it takes is Pamela zipping up your sleeping bag and saying sweet dreams for you to forget how awful they made you feel. That's betrayal trauma theory, right? Is like she can't go anywhere else. She depends on them for food and safety. And so to relieve herself from the mental anguish of trying to hold them accountable for mental abuse that they refuse to acknowledge is going on, she tells herself that they're very, very nice. And she talks herself out of her gut feelings because it's literally too exhausting to try to advocate for herself when they have proven several hundred times a day that they are not going to acknowledge her reality no matter what. They had confused her, yes, but there was no law against confusing people. They had made her say and do things she didn't want to say and do, but she was a free agent. She could have always refused. Only it hadn't seemed possible to refuse at the time. There was no law against manipulating people into doing things they didn't want to do. Society itself ran that way, and people who could do it were admired. Maybe they had hypnotized her, but there was no law against that either, as far as she knew. They hadn't used it to do any harm, only so that the flowers should seem more beautiful. But it was more likely that she and Jane had just been very overtired and paranoid that day, making themselves more susceptible to hallucination. There was no law against making someone tired, and there was no law against serving poor food, and there was no law against making people sing. Surely, if there was anything wrong, there would be a law against it. If there was no law against it, then logically there could be nothing wrong. Believe, right? That all of the laws we have right now are all the laws we're ever going to need, and that they work flawlessly and they keep people safe, and bad guys always. If there was no law against it, then logically there could be nothing wrong. She flounced over onto her other side and let out a loud sigh. A sister shushed her, although she might have done better to shush the other sisters, who were all snoring like pigs. This reality, that reality, it all began to jumble together and sound like nonsense in her head. And then again, the impossible conundrum. Wasn't Lucy the sanest person in the world? Wasn't she one of the two people that Carmen knew most completely? Hadn't Jane and Peter and Reg seemed sane at the outset of the course? But they had each paid their 12 pounds and the miracle had been wrought on them. Deep down, she was beginning to wonder about herself. She suspected that it was arrogance for her to assume that she was completely sane. After all, she hadn't tested herself against truly sane people for a long, long time. 5 days, in fact. Sanity was relative, and she was beginning to understand that it needed a constant touchstone. I think that perfectly explains why it only takes, if you look back in one of the first, might have even been the very first Heavenly Deception video where I'm wearing this exact outfit. And I say it only takes 3 days of thought reform in a controlled environment to change someone's reality. And she's like, I've been here forever. I'm holding on for dear life for my sanity. I've been here 5 whole days, and I am the only one here who is an outsider anymore. Hello, Virgil Doc, Purple Heart. Hello, Faith. Thank you for reading and commenting, and thank you for saying thank you. I think that's actually how I'm going to end this live stream. We're at 2 hours. Your girl came prepared today, and I still don't feel prepared. I might be preparing for the rest of my life. It's been riggedy real. Have a wonderful Saturday. I literally bought a pineapple. I'm in the habit now of buying a pineapple every fucking weekend, just so I can eat pineapples after this live stream, now that we keep telling jokes about pineapples. And my candle's about to burn out, so you might see me with a new candle next week. But have a good one.